You are listening to the Everything Ham Radio podcast. This is episode number 42. Today we're going to be talking about propagation. We're going to be talking about the Valley Amateur Radio Club in Eugene, Oregon. We're going to be talking about some upcoming events, some upcoming Hamfests, and some news from around the hobby. So stay tuned. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Everything Ham Radio podcast. My name is Curtis. My call sign is Kilo 5 Charlie Lima Mike. This podcast is released every Thursday morning. You can find all the links that we're going to be talking about, as well as some additional information in the show notes of today's episode at everythinghamradio.com/podcast/42. That's number 42. Now, you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/everythinghamradio. You can find me on Twitter at K5CLM. I am on YouTube at youtube.com/everythinghamradio. I am on several other news social media platforms, but those are the three that I typically use. Now, I might sound a little bit different today. My computer I was having some issues with, so I'm actually recording this episode entirely on my iPhone using a recording studio software called Boss Jock. So hopefully this works out good and it turns out nice, and so we'll see. So, like I said, today we're going to be talking about propagation. We're going to be talking about the Valley Amateur Radio Club in Eugene, Oregon. We got 2 weeks worth of events and Hamfests like we have been doing the past few episodes, and we have some news from around the hobby. So, first off, let's go ahead and get started with our Tech Corner segment, talking about propagation. So, here we go. Alright, so in today's Tech Corner, we are going to be talking about propagation. Now, propagation is basically how radio waves travel, how, the paths that they take, where they reflect off of, so on and so forth. As amateur radio operators, we really should try and use the right frequency and the right mode when we try to communicate. So if we're trying to talk to our neighbor down the road, we're not going to be using 20 or 40 meters, we're going to be using VHF, because VHF and UHF are typically line of sight. There is, if you get on like 6 meters, you can get a little bit of skip to it. Every now and then you get some skip on 2 meters, but typically VHF and UHF are going to be line of sight. Now, if you want to talk to a buddy in, another state or something like that, then you're going to be using HF. So basically, the way that typically a signal will work is on HF, let's say 20 meters, for example. The signal will be transmitted out from the antenna, whether you're using a directional antenna or an omnidirectional antenna or whatever. It's going to be sending out in a given direction, and it's going to be traveling up, and it's going to take off. It's not going to go really. It's not going to hug the earth. Is basically what I'm trying to say. It's going to go, and it's going to go up into the atmosphere, and depending on the frequency, and depending on whether you're talking during the day or during the night, it's going to hit one of the layers of the atmosphere, and it's going to bounce back down. Now, typically you get for 80 meters or something like that is a close range HF frequency, like 80 and 160 meters is typically shorter range than 20 meters will be, and that's because it reflects at different levels of the atmosphere. So for 20 meters, it's going to go probably all the way up to the E layer or the F layer of the atmosphere, and then it's going to bounce back down. So you're going to get a pretty far reach to your station that you're talking to. Now, however, there is also what's called a multipath distortion effect. And basically what this is especially if you're using an omnidirectional antenna, if you're using a vertical or a long wire or something like that, you're going to get more of this than if you're using a beam. Now, if you're using a beam or a Yagi antenna, yes, you could possibly have this. However, it's not going to be as likely to happen when you use a omnidirectional antenna. And basically what this is let's say I'm in Texas, okay, and I'm talking to somebody, say, in Europe or Africa or Australia or wherever, somewhere else in the world, and they're receiving a signal from me, they're hearing what I'm saying, and then a second later or 2 seconds later, they hear the same thing again, so they get an echo or a distortion. Basically what's happening is they're receiving my signal twice, and it's because you get your one path reception that will get there at one point in time, and then on the opposite direction they'll receive it as well. And it basically goes, one path goes one way, one path goes the other, they both meet at the other side, and they hear both of you. Sometimes this makes for a total devastation of the signal because the signal is inverted for whatever reason, which is kind of beyond me. But basically what happens is that when you get the receiver receiving the primary signal, and then it receives a secondary signal, it's off a little bit, or it's inverted, or whatever, and the signals cancel out. So you might be talking along just fine with somebody, and then all of a sudden you just can't hear them at all. And that could be what happened. Now, does this happen a lot? Yeah, probably not. With a Yagi antenna, you can actually take advantage of this in that, let's say you're talking to somebody and you have your beam pointed towards their direction or whatever, and they're having a hard time hearing you. You can actually rotate your beam 180 degrees from where you were at before, and they could potentially hear you better that way than the other way. And that's kind of the difference between short path and long path. It's basically what the terminology for that is. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But that is an option if they can't hear you all that well, or you can't hear them all that well. So, as far as HF goes, you're basically going to hit, you're going to go and you're going to bounce off the atmosphere and come back down. That's basically what propagation is going to be for HF. VHF, on the other hand, is a little bit different. VHF and UHF, there is some major differences because they're typically line of sight. Well, they also can bounce off the atmosphere. Typically like 2 meters or 6 meters will do this more often than anything else, but it is possible. And there are several other ways that you can make yourself be heard on VHF and UHF other than just a direct line of sight, or I'm behind a hill, or I'm behind a building, or behind a cliff, or whatever. There is different ways that you can actually make who you're talking to, whether that be another person or whether that be like a repeater or something like that. And you can go other ways than just line of sight. So before we actually talk about some of these ways, let's talk about line of sight, since line of sight is typically the way that you're going to be using VHF and UHF. Now, line of sight in radio communication is slightly different than on the visual spectrum of things, okay? You're going to have your audio section of your spectrum, and then you're going to have your visual. Well, your visual line of sight is basically to what as far as you can see. And if you're, say, out in the middle of nowhere, as far as you can see is, of course, that's called the horizon. Everybody pretty much knows that. Well, with radio, that horizon is just a little bit farther than what you can actually see. So let's say you have, for example, let's say that you are out in the middle of the ocean and your friend is out there too, and you just so happen that you can walk on water. Wouldn't that be cool? And you have no idea where you're going, but you want to find some kind of land. So you and your friend, you both have amateur radios with you. You're both operators, of course, and you both can walk on water. So rather than sticking together, you decide to go off in different directions. Well, as long as you can see the other person, you can talk to the other person, because there's nothing in between you and him or her to block your communications. Well, after you get so far, the curvature of the Earth actually gets in your way. And this is I believe it's 5-6 miles or something like that, if memory serves me correct, that you can no longer see each other. Well, this is where I was talking a little bit ago about how radio, or the audio spectrum, is a little bit different, or the radio horizon is a little bit different, a little bit farther than your visual horizon is. So if you can no longer see them anymore, and I'm talking flat, calm seas, and no waves, and nothing in between you, and you can't see them anymore. 5-6 miles or so is what the visual is, and then you get your radio. Okay, so after you can't see him anymore, you can call on radio, "Hey, Jim," or whatever his name, the person that you're talking to is named. "Hey, Jim, are you still there?" He comes back, "Yeah, I'm still here. I'm still walking." Well, this radio line of sight extends another couple miles. It's probably about 8 miles or so when you get apart. So 4 miles each person has walked that you can talk to each other on a handheld with 5 watts. After that 8 miles, you're pretty much SOL. You better start walking back towards each other, right? So now that we've talked about line of sight, that's typically the way that it's going to work. Whether you're in a car, whether you're on a handheld, whatever. If you can see the antenna, more than likely you can probably talk to that antenna. Not always the case, but typically it is. I mean, I have at my house, I'm sitting up on top of a hill. I'm like the probably around the second highest area in my county. I'm sitting at 925 feet or so above sea level, and the highest is 945, and it's actually right across the road from me. So I'm sitting pretty high, and all the repeaters in my county I can see. I can visually see them, with the exception of one, I think. I can't really see the other one, but it's about 15-20 miles away, so it's kind of out of my sight. But anyways, I can see most of the repeater antennas in my county. I can hit them with my handheld. Standing on my back porch, I can check into the weather nets or whatever. So as long as I can see them, I can hit them. Well, I can also see a little bit further, because there is a section of groupings of huge towers in a city called Cedar Hill. And Cedar Hill is about, I want to say about 35-40 miles from me, but there's 10 500, 600, 700 foot radio towers, or actually probably more than that, probably a couple thousand radio towers on this hill, or in this area in Cedar Hill. And it probably is pretty high area, because you can see it forever. And at night I can see the lights flashing, and I can see the top 4 lights or something like that. So I can see pretty much all of the tower, and all the major television channels are on there. All the radio stations are on there. This is the major communications hub of the DFW Metroplex. So I can see it from my house. Can I hit it with my radio? Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. It's just a little bit too far away from my radio to hear or to talk on 5 watts. I can do it on my radio, on my mobile radio in my car with 50 watts. I can do that, no problem. However, I get another couple miles west of my house and I'm on the backside of the hill and I don't hit it any longer because I have that hill in my way. This is where you get back into the line of sight thing. You're going to have issues if you have something in between you and where you're talking to. And this can be hills, it could be mountains, it could be buildings in downtown Fort Worth or Dallas or Houston or wherever. It could be a billboard for that matter. There are several things that can block your signal, especially when you get out on the outskirts of the range of your radio. However, there is some, I guess maybe phenomenon or something like that you can actually use to increase your possibilities of hitting that repeater. So let's say that you're in downtown Los Angeles or Houston or New York or Savannah, Georgia or wherever. Someplace with a lot of buildings. Okay, a lot of tall buildings, and you're on one side of the buildings and the repeater is on the other. You could possibly hit that repeater, but if you have building in the way, then you're possibly not going to hit it. Okay, so now that we've got that covered, let's say that you have a directional antenna, or even your handheld with your body standing behind it, reflecting most of the signal to go one direction. This actually works, right? It doesn't work all that great, but it actually works. You can actually hold your antenna vertically in front of your body, and this really works on receive better than transmit. But anyways, you can hold it where your body is acting as the reflector of your signal, and you can kind of point it in the direction that you want to. But let's say that you have a handheld Yagi, okay? You can actually go and point your antenna to a different building in a way that your signal will hit that building and bounce off of it and hit the repeater. So picture this in your mind here, okay? You're in one building. There's a building between you and the repeater. You probably can't hit the repeater. But there's a building on your right, there's a building on your left. And if you point your directional antenna or your rubber duck with your body behind it towards that other building, your signal could potentially bounce off one of these side buildings, go around the building that's blocking you, and hit the repeater. Now, is that signal going to be great? Maybe, maybe not. But in case of emergency, it's potentially could happen, potentially could, make the communications and save a life or something like that. So, there's another phenomenon that is called knife edge propagation. Knife edge propagation is a term that's used to describe when a signal is partially refracted around solid objects exhibiting sharp edges. And this is actually one of the test questions, if you can remember whenever you took your technician class license. It's actually T3C05 is the question that this talks about. And you might be able to use this phenomenon to get your signal around a building like we were just talking about. And also, like if there is a mountain between you and the repeater, you can potentially, this could potentially happen to your signal so that you can get into the repeater. Now, as I said, it partially refracts around solid objects exhibiting sharp edges. So if it's a mountain peak and it's all jagged and not very, sharp edge like, then potentially it might not work. But if, say, it has a cliff face to it, basically what happens is that your signal will, your signal goes up rather than out really along the earth. It doesn't really hug the earth, so to speak. It typically goes kind of up more. So if you're on the bottom of this mountain and you're talking, your signal's going to go up, and it's kind of going to hang around towards the bottom because, going up the side of the mountain is basically the same takeoff angle as what your frequency is going to be. So it's kind of going to hug the ground. You get to the top of the mountain, if it's sharp, if the peak is sharp, or you get to an edge of a cliff or something like that, potentially part of your signal could break off from the rest of it and kind of like do a hard 90-degree turn and go back down the other side. Now, half your signal will continue off into outer space, never to be heard from again. But the other half of your signal could potentially go down the other side of the mountain and hit the repeater. This is one of those things when you did I really hit that? Did I really hit that repeater? Did I really make that contact? How on earth am I talking to a town on the other side of this mountain range? It happens. It's one of those rare phenomenons, but it does happen. So if this happens, this could be what's happening to your transmission when you are making that long distance contact. And this typically happens on VHF more than UHF, I believe. Okay, so something else that will really affect how your signal is received or how good your signal is received is what polarization you have on it. Typically on VHF and UHF, you use vertical polarization, and on HF signals, you will use horizontal polarization. So if you're on VHF and you have a directional antenna, and you're trying to hit this repeater, if you're holding your antenna flat or in a horizontal polarization, meaning that the elements of the antenna are parallel with the ground or the floor, you're not going to have as good of signal or as good of chance of hitting the antenna of the repeater, because typically the antenna of the repeater is up and down. It's vertical. So if you rotate your beam 90 degrees left or right, doesn't matter, and to where your elements of your beam are perpendicular to the floor, then you're going to have the same typical polarization of the receiving antenna, and you're going to hit it a whole lot easier. The other reason, or on HF, you use horizontal polarization, and it's basically for easier refraction, I guess, back down to the earth, because, if you use a vertical polarization and you're going up, when it bounces back down, it's going to have some kind of distortion to it, potentially, whereas if it's horizontal, the whole signal will bounce. It's kind of like, let's say a dolphin. Okay, let's say that a dolphin is swimming through the water and it jumps out of the water. Okay, it jumps up and it jumps down. Well, if it's on its belly, where it's more vertical than horizontal, it's going to jump up and jump down, and it's going to have very little splash, right? Now let's think about a whale. Okay, you know how oftentimes a whale will jump out of the water and turn sideways and come back down, and it makes this big old splash. Well, which has more splash? Does the splash of the dolphin, where it's more vertical and jumping out of the water, does it have a bigger splash, or does the whale that comes down on its side have a bigger splash? Well, the whale does, right? And it's basically typically the same thing with radio frequencies, okay? If you have your vertical polarization, you're pointing up towards towards wherever you're going, your signal takes off and goes into the atmosphere. When it hits the E layer, the F layer, F2 layer, F1 layer, whichever layer it's going to hit and bounce back on, it's going to have just a smaller area to reflect back. Now, if it's horizontal, it has the entire width of the radio wave. It's going to bounce up, it's going to smoothly bounce back down, and you're going to make a contact. So remember, VHF, UHF, vertical, VHF vertical, HF horizontal. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about here, this entire time I've talked that VHF and UHF are typically line of sight. There are some phenomena, like I said, like knife edge propagation, where you can get out of sight, and I'm doing air quotes here. But there are some other things that you can do on VHF, and this is typically, again, on 2 meters and 6 meters when this happens. And with this first part that I'm going to happen, it actually happens on 10 meters as well. With VHF, you can sometimes talk a longer distance than line of sight, and this is because it bounces off the E layer of the atmosphere, which the E layer is the very bottom layer of the atmosphere, I believe. And this is called sporadic E transmission, or sporadic E layer communication, or something like that. It's basically sporadic E. But this happens basically when your VHF signal is transmitted, it bounces off the E layer or refracts off the E layer and goes back down to Earth. And this makes for a little bit longer communication, but typically, a couple of 100 miles is all you're going to get. So maybe the next step stayed over. And like I said, this typically happens on 2 meters and 6 meters. It does happen sometimes on 10 meters. Now, another interesting way of using VHF for longer distances is things like Aurora reflection. You can actually bounce your signal off the Aurora Borealis. You can do it off of meteor showers. You can do it off of satellites, since your VHF signal kind of typically goes out into space and never comes back. You can actually aim it towards the satellite, and the satellite will retransmit it back to Earth. You can bounce it off the moon. I've never actually seen this done. I hear it can be done. It's a long way for a signal to transmit, and I would think that it probably have quite a bit of delay to it as well. But anyways, you can do that. You can bounce it off a comet trail. You can do tropospheric scatter. Or tropospheric ducting. Tropospheric ducting is kind of cool, and basically what this is that when the air is, when the air is warmer in the higher altitudes and it's colder in the lower altitudes, I believe, is when this happens. And this typically happens when you're next to a large body of water like the ocean. So along the coastline is typically where you're going to where this is going to happen at. And basically what happens is that the signal enters this area where it's colder above than it is below, and your signal will actually be transmitted or be relayed or held in this area or whatever along the Earth, and it'll actually go along the curvature of the Earth to someplace on the other side of the world. So, if you're, say, living in Florida, you could potentially talk to somebody in Europe using tropospheric ducting. It doesn't happen a lot. I think I've actually had this happen to me one time, and I think this is possibly what happened. Maybe not. Could possibly what happened when I actually talked to the Olympic Special Event Station when it was in Australia. I'm quite a far away from the coast, so probably not. But it could have potentially been. But I'm gonna say probably not. Let's see, what else? Like I said, you can do it off a meteor shower. A meteor, you can, transmit typically a 6 meter signal up to a meteor, and it will bounce it back. Let's see, what else? Well, that pretty much wraps it up, I think. I will have some links in the show notes to several different pages that I found and got some information from, one of which is the Technician class series covering weak signal propagation that I did last year in 2015, in the fall of 2015. There is a entire section of questions that covers propagation, especially things like tropospheric ducting, meteor scatter, different layers of the atmosphere, polarization, stuff like that. So I will have a link to it, as well as a nice short little PDF file that I found from the Tri-County Amateur Radio Club that talks about basically the same thing, but it's more in like a written type format. But it does have links to all of the questions and stuff that are covered in this thing. I believe it's like some kind of how to get your ham license type thing. But I will have links to that. I will have links to my Technician class series as well. And so, yeah, I guess that's pretty much about it as far as the news. So let's go ahead and get to the Amateur Radio Club Spotlight. All right, everybody. So first off, let me apologize for the quality of this episode. Like I said, I am recording this on my iPhone, just with the built-in iPhone microphone. It doesn't sound all that great, but for whatever reason, my computer decided to not work for me, and I'm going to try and get that fixed. But it's not going to be anytime soon. Probably sometime later on this week when I actually get some days off. But anyways, let me apologize for the sound quality. I really like this program that I'm using. I actually bought it several months ago and actually recorded another episode on it. And I don't remember it sounding this way. It really sounds really airy and really far off, maybe, I guess you could say. Maybe I just need to adjust some settings or something, or I don't know. But I do know that am going to eventually get a new microphone, a USB microphone, and get a connection where I can connect it to my iPhone to record, or I can record on my computer, either way. So hopefully it will be better, and again, I apologize for the quality of this. Having said that, I would like to mention a couple things to y'all before we go on with our club spotlight. Gigaparts has been really awesome to me, and they've given me a couple things to give away. They've given some discount codes for y'all to use. Unfortunately, with this last coupon code that they gave me for the Nanut case, nobody used. And it really surprised me, because these things are really awesome cases. Nobody took advantage of the 10% off. Now, whether they didn't do that because there was some other coupon code that was better or what have you, but it really surprised me when I was talking to my contact, Jeff, there at Gigaparts. He said nobody used it. So I don't know what we're going to do from here. But I am still trying to work with Gigaparts. They have a lot of great stuff, and I do know, as of the time of this recording, they have 5% off 2 or more items at $25. However, it ends on the 31st, and this doesn't go live until the 3rd. So you won't be able to take advantage of that. And unfortunately, I don't know what the next discount thing that they're going to have is going to be. So I wish I would have thought a little bit ahead of time and actually went and got that, but I didn't. But I would like to recommend that y'all go to gigaparts.com, check out all the equipment that they have. They have used equipment, new equipment, computers. They have... Yeah, sorry about that for the delay. Had a coughing fit there, and I thought I got a pause, but maybe I didn't. But anyways, so definitely go and check them out. Another thing, I got an email from the South Canadian Amateur Radio Club that I did the club spotlight on last episode. From them, they have some interesting stuff coming that are out. They're sending me a copy of it, and I'm going to check it out and probably do a future episode on it, or at least a review blog post. So stay tuned for that. To tune in later on a future episode to learn more. So let's go ahead and go on with the Valley Amateur Radio Club in our Amateur Radio Club Spotlight. Hey everybody, for the Amateur Radio Club Spotlight for this episode, we're going to be talking about the Valley Radio Club. You can find them at www.valleyradioclub.org. The Valley Radio Club of Oregon, formerly the Valley Radio Club of Eugene, is located in Eugene, Oregon, was chartered in 1932 and is one of the oldest continuously operated club stations in the United States. It has been affiliated with the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL, since 1932, and is associated with the American Red Cross since 1951. The meetings are on the first Friday at 7 p.m. in the Red Cross building at 862 Bethel Drive in Eugene, Oregon. They have one repeater. It is located on the 146.720 frequency with a negative offset and a PL of 100. They have two nets that I found on their website. I don't know if they have more or not, but they have a HF net, the Peak Radio Association, which is on Mondays at 7:30 p.m. Pacific Time on 7.25 megahertz. They also have an HF net up the creek on Thursdays at 7:30 p.m. Pacific Time on 25.45 megahertz. This club seems to be pretty active. They have a club station, I believe. It's like a get-on-the-air station at the Science Factory at 2300 Leo Harris Parkway in Eugene, Oregon. They open it pretty much every Saturday from noon till 2, so people can go and get on the air on HF. And they have pretty much all the bands. They have some digital and some other stuff. They have some DX special interest groups that they meet once a month. They have testing sessions on the second Wednesday of every month at 7 p.m. They do technician classes, which they just started, I believe, last month, as well as a general class that started last month. They assist in locating sources of RFI, or radio frequency interference. They do field day, March of Dimes, community service, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So this seems to be a really active club, and I would recommend that if you are going to be anywhere near Eugene, Oregon, right around the first Friday of the month, or one of the net times or something like that, or since the HF nets that they have are on HF, you can probably check in not being there. But if you happen to be in Eugene, Oregon, or anywhere around it, around the first Friday of the month, definitely head on over to their meeting and check them out. Alright, so let's talk about some upcoming events. All the times that I'm going to talk about are going to be in Zulu time unless otherwise specified. So first up, we have the NRAU 10-meter activity contest, and we have 4 different times here for 4 different modes. From 1800 to 1900 Zulu on the 3rd is CW. From 1900 to 2000 hours on the 3rd is single sideband. From 2000 hours to 2100 hours on the 3rd is FM. And from 2100 to 2200 is digital. The NCCC RTTY sprint is on the 4th from 145 to 215, and followed by the NCCC sprint on the 4th from 230 to 300 hours. The IPARC contest on CW is on the 5th from 600 to 1000 hours and from 1400 to 1800 hours. The Ukrainian DX contest will be starting on the 5th at 1200 hours and run to the 6th at 1200 hours. The RSGB International Sprint Contest on single sideband will be November the 5th from 1700 to 2100 hours. The ARRL Sweepstakes Contest on CW will be from 2,100 hours on the 5th to 300 hours on the 7th. The IP-ARC contest on single sideband will be from 600 hours to 1,000 hours and 1,400 hours to 1,800 hours on the 6th. The EANET sprint will be on the 6th from 800 hours to 1,200 hours. The High Speed Club CW contest will be on the 6th from 1,900 to 1,100 and from 1,500 to 1,700. The DARC 10-meter digital contest will be on the 6th from 1,100 hours to 1,700 hours. The ARS Spartan Sprint will be on the 8th from 200 hours to 400 hours, and followed by the Phone Fray from 230 to 300 hours on the 9th. And the CW Ops Mini CWT test will be on the 9th from 1,300 to 1,400 and from 1,900 to 2,000 hours, and on the 10th from 300 to 400 hours. On the 9th, we have the RSGB 80-meter club sprints on single sideband that will run from 2,000 to 2,100 hours. And again, we have the NCCC RTTY sprint on the 11th from 145 to 215, and the regular NCCC sprint from 230 to 300 hours, also on the 11th. The WAE DX contest on RTTY will run from November the 12th at 0 hours to 23:59 on the 13th. The 1010 International Fall Contest for Digital will be from 01 on November 12th to 23:59 on the 13th. The JIDX Phone Contest will be on the 12th, starting at 700 hours and ending on the 13th at 1,300 hours. The SKCC Weekend Sprintathon will be on November the 12th, starting at 1,200 hours and ending on the 13th at 2,400 hours. The OKOM DX contest on CW will start at 1,200 hours on the 12th and run till 1,200 hours on the 13th. The Kentucky QSO party will be from 1,400 hours on the 12th to 200 hours on the 13th. The CWWE contest on CW and Digital will be on the 12th from 1,900 to 2,300 hours, on phone on the 13th from 100 to 500 hours, and from 1,900 to 2,300 hours, and again on CW and Digital on the 14th from 1 to 500 hours. The phone fray will be on November the 16th from 2:30 to 3 o'clock, and ending up this segment of the upcoming events will be the CW Ops Mini CWT test, which will be on the 16th from 1,300 to 1,400 hours and from 1,900 to 2,000 hours, and last but not least on the 17th from 3 to 4. All this information was taken from the WA7BNM contest calendar, which you can find a link to in the show notes of today's episode. Alright, so next up in our in this episode, we have Hamfests, and there are quite a few that are coming up here in the next couple weeks or so. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, on the 5th of November, we have the Enid ARC Hamfest in Enid, Oklahoma, the FARA Fest in Borney, Massachusetts, the GARC Hamfest in Georgetown, Ohio. We have the Georgia State Convention, the Stone Mountain Hamfest in Lawrenceville, Georgia. The Harkfest in Congress, Arizona. We have the LARA Tailgate in Tavares, Florida. The Link McGarthy WV4I Memorial Free Flea, that is a mouthful, and West Palm Beach, Florida. We have the I am having a hard time reading here, guys. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's try it again. We have the MRC 91 Radio Fest in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the NARC Fest 2016 in Nixa, Missouri, and Tech Fest in Lakewood, Colorado. On the 6th, we have the Davenport RAC Hamfest and Computer Show in Davenport, Iowa, the FCARC Swap Fest in Appleton, Wisconsin, and the WACOM Hamfest 2016 in Washington, Pennsylvania. And the next weekend, on the 11th, we have the Jackson County ARA Hamfest in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, I believe, MS. On the 12th, we have the Big Island of Hawaii International Swap Meet and Hamfest in Kamalua, Hawaii. The Flamingo Net University of Miami ARC Free Flea in Coral Gables, Florida. We have the GSARC Beach Fest 2016 in Conway, South Carolina. I wonder if that's anywhere close to Kale. We have the Indiana State Convention, Fort Wayne Hamfest and Computer Expo in Fort Wayne, Indiana. The New Orleans Ham Radio and Computer Flea Market in Harahan. I know I'm probably butchering that name. Sorry about that. Harahan, Louisiana. We have the Oro Valley ARC Hamfest in Marianna, Arizona, the Raytown ARC Hamfest in Kansas City, Missouri, and last but not least, the SP ARC Fest 2016 in Pinellas Park, Florida. Some of these towns are really hard for me to say. All the information that we got that I mentioned today are listed on the ARRL Hamfest calendar. So if your Hamfest is on there and I didn't mention it, that would be probably why. Because all this was taken right from the ARRL website. And that pretty much wraps it up for the Hamfest for the next 2 weekends. So let's go ahead and move on. All right, so let's move on to the news. Recently, I received an email, and I posted this as a blog post as well, but I figured I'd mention it on the podcast since not everybody reads my blog. Back in episode number 27, I believe, we had a gentleman on as a guest, and he talked about hams with disabilities. And that, like I said, that was episode number 27. You can go back and listen to him if you'd like on that episode. It's going to be at everythinghamradio.com/podcast/27. That's the number 27. And his name was Christopher LaRue, W4ADL, and he was from North Las Vegas. Well, we had been talking back and forth recently, and, well, ever since he was on there, we've been talking back and forth. But one of the things that we talked about one time in an email was the vanity call sign system. And he had mentioned to me that there was a gentleman that he knew that, or saw on a forum somewhere or something like that, that just got a brand new call sign, and could be because he was trying to get a call sign of his grandfather or uncle or something like that, and was not able to do it because this person was issued the license rather than him. And when he looked up this gentleman, he had like 16 different call signs in 18 months. So he put in a petition to the FCC and has gotten pretty good feedback to it. So I'm going to read you the article that is posted on the ARRL. And the article reads as follows. The FCC is inviting comments on the petition for rulemaking on RM-11775 from a Nevada radio amateur that seeks changes to the rules governing the amateur radio vanity call sign program. Christopher LaRue, W4ADL of North Las Vegas, is proposing that any licensee obtaining a vanity call sign be required to keep it for the full license term. LaRue contends in his petition that excessive and frequent vanity call sign filings are hampering the abilities of other qualified licensees to obtain vanity call signs in the one of more desirable 1x2 or 2x1 formats. LaRue said that since the FCC dropped the fee to file for the vanity call sign, some applicants are taking advantage by regularly obtaining new call signs, thereby keeping them out of circulation. The quote, some of the changing call signs. Back up. Some are changing call signs almost monthly just to keep the newer code-free extra-class operators from obtaining a shorter call sign, he said in his petition. I even saw an older operator that said he does it all the time and has not even owned a radio in over 6 years. When I looked him up, he had 16 different call signs in 18 months. LaRue said his proposed minor rule change will require any licensee applying for and obtaining an amateur radio vanity call sign be required to keep it for the duration of the license, which is currently 10 years. He said this would alleviate a lot of stress on the ULS system and manpower requirements at the FCC. It will also keep inactive amateurs from changing call signs regularly, thereby tying up the call signs for 2 years after dismissal of said call sign. Interested parties may comment using the FCC electronic comment filing system. Comments are due within 30 days of the October 26 posting date. Some of this I can agree with. And I've talked with him a little bit about it. I'm not sure about the requirement of, having to keep it over the entire 10 years. Maybe half that, or maybe 2 years or something like that. That I can understand, but and honestly, if you're going to change your call sign, you're probably going to change your call sign anyways, and you're not going to change it. So, but anyways, that is that. There's been a lot of questions. There's been a lot of people that have agreed with him, that have left comments and sent him direct messages and emails and whatnot. So good luck to you, Chris, and hopefully this does make a change, because there honestly really does need to be some kind of change for sure. So next up we have something new that really... it's really going to hurt hams in California. They're really going to have to do something a little bit differently. And it is a new piece of legislation that was passed and the governor signed, and it was filed with the Secretary of State on September 26th, so almost a month ago. And honestly, it's kind of surprising that I didn't hear anything about it beforehand, but who knows? Anyways, this is the Assembly Bill number 1785. And basically what this thing says is that you cannot use your ham radio in your vehicle while you're driving. Yeah, so that means all the truck drivers that are driving, they can't use their CB. Ham radio operators that have vehicles in their car can't use it. Basically, anybody that has any kind of wireless electronic communication device is now unable to use it in their vehicle, with the exception of first responders, law enforcement, fire, police, or fire, EMS, so on and so forth. They are allowed to do it. And if you get caught, it's like your first fine is $20, and then every offense after that is $50. So, yeah. So basically, I think the only really way around this is to have like a headset and maybe like a foot switch or something, or using Vox or something like that, which is not really all that great when you're driving. I can just imagine, because, sometimes people, when they cut me off, I don't say two very nice words sometimes, and that's just exactly what I need to go out over the air. So, yeah, it really surprised me, like I said, that I didn't hear anything about this, or that the ARRL didn't post anything about this. Maybe they did, and I just didn't see it. But California hams, sorry guys, you're going to have to get some kind of headset or foot switch or something in your vehicle to talk on the radio while you're driving it. So that's going to make for some sad times, I think. Maybe the ARRL will do something and can push back on this and get it rescinded or something, but who knows. But anyways, that's what that is. Okay, so along those same lines, well, kind of sort of the same lines, Let's talk about what went on in Nevada, in Clark County, Nevada. Back on the 27th, Aries Races supports Office of Emergency Management during the presidential debates. Now, I will be so glad when this election is over with, and it's sad to say that. Well, in a way, it's kind of sad to say that, but here's why I say it. On my Twitter feed, I have several groups, several lists, and I'm sure that most of y'all that use Twitter do as well. I have ham radio list. I have like a ham radio news list. I have several different things. But anyways, no matter what list I go to, it never seems to fail that probably 90% of the posts that are on that have something to do with politics, something to do with the election, something that Hillary did, or something that Trump did, or whatever. Or it's so frustrating. When I'm trying to go through my feed and trying to find something that's worth sharing with with y'all, and all I find is election crap. So I will be so glad when this is done and over with. But anyways, on to this story. This was posted on the 27th on the ARRL newsfeed. So it reads as follows. Aries Races volunteers step up to support communications for the Clark County, Nevada Office of Emergency Management. During the third U.S. presidential debate in Las Vegas, Nevada on October 19th, Clark County OEM Chief John Steinbeck asked Aries Races to activate and support the county's multi-agency coordination center. 7 Clark County Aries Races members operated UHF and VHF voice, as well as VHF packet and mesh VoIP, voice over IP, from the MACC, as well as from the Clark County IT Department communications van throughout the event. In addition, Aries Races members provided backup monitoring of all event communications. Among the amateur radio volunteers supporting the effort were ARRL Nevada Section Traffic Manager Jim Bassett, W1RO, Nevada Southern District Emergency Coordinator Jay Peskin, KE7EGO, Jim Davis, KF7GCT, Steve Denevy, KF7WGL, Frank Kostlovac, sorry if I butchered your name there, Frank, if you listen, N7ZEV, and Jack Cook, N8RRL. Also providing support from the communications van was Aries Races member Keith Orrich, KD7TOF of the Clark County IT Department. In addition, more than a dozen Clark County Aries Races members remained on standby monitoring communications from home and mobile stations in case a wider activation was required. Clark County Aries Races Emergency Coordinator Bill Smith, W7HMV, praised the Aries Races members who volunteered their time, equipment, and skills to support the OEM for this event. The activation marked the first time that Aries Races members operated from the MACC's new location, which as yet has no radio equipment installed. They were able to test and verify the capabilities to use existing external communication sources using their own equipment from a new and potentially challenging venue. So, one more example of what amateur radio can do when a need arises. So, very awesome, very awesome. All right, and last but not least, for sure, in our news segment here, y'all may remember several episodes ago, I talked about a cows over the world, or cows of the world, or something like that. Cows over the world, Pacific DXpedition, that was cut short because the person that was doing it had all of his belongings stolen. Well, it seems that KC0W regroups in the wake of the Pacific Island threat, according to the ARRL News on October the 28th. Thomas Callis, KC0W, who was forced to abruptly cancel the rest of his Cows Over the World Pacific D-expeditions after his belongings were stolen in Krabi, has been regrouping. I will be in the Philippines from October 26th to November 25th, and the call sign will be 4 India 7 Charlie Oscar Whiskey. Callis said from his QRZ.com profile, "This unique prefix has never been issued before, so should generate some good interest." Callis said he's canceled his planned TG/KC0W de-expedition to Guatemala in favor for pending de-expeditions to Equatorial Guinea and Annabon following his Philippines activity. He reports fantastic progress in acquiring the 3C and 3C0 licenses. Equatorial Guinea is number 43 on the Club Log DXCC Most Wanted list. Annabon is number 35. He hopes to be on the air from Equatorial Guinea and Amadon for 50 to 60 days and says to stay tuned for more information. Alright, so that about wraps it up for the news segment of this episode and pretty much for the episode itself. So let's, I guess that's about it. Alright, everybody, so once again, I would like to say thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Everything Ham Radio podcast. Again, my name is Curtis, K5CLM, and this is episode number 42. You can find the show notes for this episode at everythinghamradio.com/podcast/42. You can follow me on Facebook at facebook.com/everythinghamradio, on YouTube at youtube.com/everythinghamradio, and on Twitter at K5CLM. If you'd like to support this podcast financially, you can go to everythinghamradio.com/support, and you can make a one-time donation through PayPal. You can become a Patreon and make a per-episode contribution of like $1, $5, $10, whatever. And you can also just shop on Amazon.com like you normally would, but use my affiliate code. That will give me a small basically finder's fee, and it will help me out a bunch. You will not notice a difference in the prices at all. If you would like to subscribe to my email list, you can do that super easy. Just go to everythinghamradio.com/subscribe. You'll get an email when I publish a new podcast or a new blog post. So that about wraps it up for this episode. Again, I'd like to thank you very much for listening, and until next time, this is K5CLM signing out.